This is Going Underground. I'm Afshin Rattansi. In today's show, abused, tortured in Guantanamo, Shaker Aamer is still there, and today protesters go to Parliament to fight for him. And who are the puppet masters pulling the strings at Westminster? Plus, Ed Miliband says he won't let TTIP privatize the NHS, but is it only WikiLeaks that knows what's going on at the secret negotiations over the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership deal? All this and more on today's Going Underground. The Prime Minister may not have made any comment so far about why the UK taxpayer continues to spend millions to surround a London embassy because Swedish lawyers won't Skype with Julian Assange, but nor has the UN Secretary-General said anything about the plight of the world's whistleblowers. Instead, Ban Ki-moon has found time to sing John Lennon's Imagine with celebrities in a charity music video in aid of UNICEF children's charity. UNICEF has had its share of scandals involving misappropriation of funds and corruption. But is charity itself a scandal? There are over 160,000 registered charities in the UK. We have 2,000 veteran charities, 1,120 disability charities, and 20 charities dedicated to saving the hedgehog. But what's bad about so many voices saying the same thing?
And start giving £2 a month.
Giving £2 a month.
Give £2 a month.
Your £2 a month.
Just £2 a month.
Just £2 a month.
And give £2 a month. That's all I'm asking.
This drastic doubling up of charities means that the billions being donated to good causes every year are spread out between thousands of different charities. This may sound like a good thing, but each of these charities have their own staff, administration costs, and expenses, meaning that less and less money is going to the rightful recipients. So, with all this extra charitable expenditure, how much of your hard-earned cash is actually going to those in need? Well, according to David Craig, author of the new book, The Great Charity Scandal, £6.35 of every £10 at Oxfam and as little as £2.57 at the RSPB. Both of these charities deny the claims but have not got back to us with the exact figures in time for the programme. So where is all the money going? Well, some of the chief execs of charities certainly aren't in need. Save the Children allegedly pays its top employee £230,000 a year. That's more than our Prime Minister David Cameron, whose wife is an ambassador to the same charity. The six biggest anti-poverty charities have 142 staff being paid £60,000 a year and 17 employees with salaries of more than £100,000. Some say charities should amalgamate to save money and expenses, but then, given those on poorer incomes pay disproportionately more to charity, maybe it would be fairer if causes were funded democratically through income tax. In fact, if welfare and the environment were properly funded, there would be no need for homeless or bird protection charities. Whatever you think, as we get ever closer to the time of giving, be careful that those in need will be the ones who are receiving, as you imagine a world without greed or hunger. Today, protesters take to Parliament to fight for the last British prisoner at Guantanamo Bay, Shaker Aamer. 7 years after President Obama promised to close Guantanamo down, MPs and activists will be meeting tomorrow at the House of Commons. With me is one MP demanding his release, John McDonnell, Labour Member of Parliament for Hayes and Harlington. Welcome back, John, to Going Underground. You're speaking at tomorrow's meeting. Why is he still in Guantanamo?
It's a mystery to us. It really is a mystery. As you say, he's been cleared for release twice now on 2 occasions, and there's no evidence whatsoever against him. And this seems to be almost an act of spite by the US government. So what we're doing is we're calling again in Parliament for the UK government to intervene now, put pressure on President Obama to release him. As you say, Obama promised to close Guantanamo Bay down altogether, but to have someone languishing in there now for 13 years who's been proven innocent and completely cleared, it is just unjust.
How do you mean an act of spite?
Well, it seems as though Shaker has played a role at Guantanamo Bay on behalf of other prisoners. He was the person who helped form the Prisoners' Council to expose the torture that was going on at Guantanamo Bay. And as a result of that, he was then put in for a number of years into solitary confinement and also subjected to considerable abuse himself. I think he's been targeted because he's become the voice of the injustices within Guantanamo Bay.
The Foreign Secretary has dismissed concerns of abuse against Shaker.
Well, it's interesting. The British government has now raised the issue of Shaker Aamer, and the Prime Minister has said he's raised it directly with the President of the US, and yet we're seeing no movement whatsoever. We think that there's an underlying current within the British government and maybe British intelligence that are not willing to confront the US over this miscarriage of justice.
Because as you say, the Prime Minister said that.
Yeah.
Interesting that the Foreign Secretary, on those counts of those accusations of abuse, said no. In fact, they have a statement. We made inquiries with US government officials who assured us that the report of an incident relayed to you by another detainee is not accurate.
Well, let me just give another example, because I had the same response from the Foreign Secretaries, successive Foreign Secretaries, about a constituent that I had that was detained in Pakistan, that was tortured and then interrogated by British intelligence, and that was denied throughout. We now know it was true. I believe because we now know from the evidence that Shaker has given that whilst he was being tortured, he was also being interrogated by MI5 and MI6 officers, so UK intelligence as well. I think there's been a cover-up within the Foreign Office itself and within our own intelligence services. And the reason they're anxious about Shaker being released, because when he is released, we'll have the full information, all that went on, and British involvement in some of the atrocities that have happened.
In other words, UK intelligence was colluding with US intelligence in what is...
It's a huge miscarriage of justice. What Shaker said is that when he was detained in 2001 and then sent to Guantanamo in 2002, during that first year, he was interrogated and tortured, and he knew that there were MI5, MI6 officers part of that interrogation process. So I think there's elements within the British state who do not want Shaker Aamer released because he's there to expose UK collusion in all of this. What Shaker did is that through his lawyers and as best he could, he got the information out was what was happening in Guantanamo Bay, not just to himself, but to other prisoners as well. And remember, we've had suicides in Guantanamo Bay as a result of the pressure that's been exerted on individual prisoners. Shaker was very brave, and tried to expose all of that. And that's why I think he's been the subject of not just continued abuse, but also continued detention. Once he comes out, I think we'll have the full exposure of what went on in Guantanamo Bay.
Do you think Philip Hammond might be a clean broom, as it were, if William Hague is so involved in this?
I was hoping so. I was hoping that Philip, with a new Secretary of State, I thought there might be the opportunity then to look at this afresh. Because remember, this campaign is supported on a cross-party basis. We've had Conservative MPs raising this case. We've had Lib Dems, members of the coalition raising the issue, as well as Labour MPs. So there's immense pressure on the government to act. And I think the walls will come down, but unfortunately, in the meantime, Shaker's health is deteriorating, and obviously he's separated from his family. He lived within the UK. He's not a UK citizen, but the rest of his family is, and he lived in London with his family and settled here. Now, on that basis, the UK government does have a responsibility for him. What I can't understand is that the UK and America are meant to have a special relationship. And that special relationship should be one of honesty and, well, cooperation. What I can't understand is here's the UK government making representations directly to the President. The President is aware that Shaker Aamer has been cleared twice now and therefore is innocent and should be released. What I can't understand, unless there's some element of collusion within the intelligence services, I can't understand why he hasn't been released already.
Because President Obama has made deals, Washington made deals with the Taliban over the release of 5 Guantanamo detainees for the release of a American soldier. No deals with David Cameron. Maybe David Cameron isn't asking.
But he released those individuals when there was much more concern about what they'd done in the past. Here we have Shaker Aamer. As I say, he's been cleared twice. He's completely innocent. He has no history of any form of terrorist activity whatsoever. In fact, all it's been is an aid and charity worker. That's all. I cannot comprehend why Obama still wants to keep him in Guantanamo Bay, other than I think the intelligence services do not want him released because he's a whistleblower. And when he comes out, he'll whistleblow on all the torture and all the... Well, I think he'll be the evidence of what went on within Guantanamo Bay that led to people actually dying.
Your party, of course, doesn't have a history either of demanding the release of people, British nationals or British citizens. Do you think it's a coalition problem? Do you think there'd be any change if Labour was in power as regarding Shaker Aamer?
I think that the last government, the new Labour government, didn't do enough and should have been firmer under the Blair and Brown regimes. And this government has, to be frank, done exactly the same. They've uttered the words but not taken the actions. There's a head of steam now building up, though. After all these years, the more and more people are becoming aware of this case, they're beginning to mobilise. As you say, we're at Parliament. We're forming an all-party group in Parliament itself, so there's a consistent lobbying campaign. We're seeking meetings with the US ambassador in this country, and we're also seeking a delegation across to the White House. The pressure is building now. In some ways, you know, Shaker's case is becoming international as well. More and more people are realising the huge, immense injustice that there is here. And on that basis, I don't think the Obama regime will be able to withstand this sort of pressure.
Or would, because some people thinking that there is going to be a Labour victory, would it be in Ed Miliband's party political interest to cozy up to Washington ahead of an election and leave Shaker Aamer completely off the table, especially in early discussions that may be going on right now?
I think there's an issue here about the scale of the campaigning that's taking place, that no matter who's in power in the UK after the next general election, if Shaker Aamer hasn't been released by then, I think it will be on the agenda of that government. Because for the first time now, we're getting really publicity around the case itself. Everyone we explain the facts to, right the way across the political spectrum, are now asking questions, well, why is this happening? This is a real abuse. And therefore, I think any government will have to act on this.
John McDonnell, thank you.
Yes.
Coming up after the break, are our politicians for sale, or are they just easily influenced by the people around them? And which media oligarch is using Winnie the Pooh to stoke fears about immigration? All this and more in part 2 of Going Underground. The Syrian National Coalition, the kind of moderate rebels that David Cameron supports, has been complaining to Philip Hammond that we shouldn't be fighting ISIS. Apparently, we should train more Syrian rebels instead of bombing ISIS. Echoes of this story could be found in Viscount Rothermere's Daily Mail.
Jordan's Queen Rania in powerful attack on ISIS for hijacking the Arab world with horror beheadings on social media that drag us back to the Dark Ages.
That's interesting, because Queen Rania's husband is King Abdullah, and some analysts allege Jordanian commandos trained the Free Syrian Army with anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons, and those rebels, according to even mainstream sources, joined ISIS. One paper that talked about the training was the Barclay Twins Telegraph, and in the past week it had an interesting take on the fight against another evil, Ebola.
Queen fears malaria comeback. The Queen fears malaria will make a comeback because attention is being focused on Ebola.
Forget about the Barclays misspelling of the word focused. Her Majesty certainly seems to have the right idea here about malaria. It kills nearly 1 million people a year, mostly under the age of 5. No charity record yet. But the tabloids weren't interested in the Queen. They're reaching new heights of hysteria about immigration.
Fury as immigrant says, I'll get £25,000 in benefits when I bring family to UK.
Yes, somehow Richard Desmond's Express represents all European immigrants in Britain using one interview. Mind you, Polish attitudes to children's stories and cartoons do seem different if Evgeny Lebedev's Independent is to be believed.
Winnie the Pooh banned from Polish playground for being an inappropriate hermaphrodite.
It's a cultural thing, according to one councillor in a small Polish town. A Milne's heroic bear
is half naked, which is wholly inappropriate for children. Poland's fictional bear is dressed from head to toe, unlike Pooh, who is only dressed from the waist up.
Subtle cultural bigotry against Eastern Europeans in the non-tabloid press, anyone? The economy, welfare and the NHS are the big tickets for the parties battling it out to take the keys to number 10 in next year's election. But as we come closer to the months of campaigning and their pledges, the party's pledges, who is influencing our politicians' decisions? With me here in the studio is Ed Straw, former number 10 advisor and former partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, now PwC. Welcome back, Ed. So
thank you.
This winter, what will the lobbying firms be doing with our major parties?
Well, it's getting a little trickier because as we get up towards an election, then the government, the politicians are taking more notice of us, the electors, because to get back in, they require our votes. The further we get away from election, the less they care, the
So you
less
mean
it...
just after an election, the lobbyists immediately get in because they have the most power?
Pretty quickly, yes. I mean, give it a few months for things to settle down, but then this is the beauty of representative democracy for lobbying firms, is that you only get power to the people at election time, and then, of course, it's pretty muddled in our system.
Take us through the coalface of it, because you were in 10 Downing Street. Does that mean that a lobbyist on behalf of a multinational can just ring up the health secretary, any cabinet minister, and just start having drinks with him?
Well, what you do is get a lobbying firm. Lobbying firms typically have come out of special advisors, policy wonks and all the rest of it, the people around Westminster, so they've got personal relationships, so they've got access. Then you're starting to knock on doors also of the civil servants, particularly important and particularly amenable to lobbying, because they don't actually have any knowledge or experience of the industry or the subject on which they're being lobbied. So it's very easy to feed them with ideas, to feed them with thoughts, which then makes them look as though they know what they're talking about when they don't. So they're very open to that whole process.
Is there no one regulating this?
There's no one regulating it in the sense, I mean, our system is perfectly designed for lobbying and for lobbyists to achieve. Even better if you've got first past the post, because then Murdoch can come along to you and he can say, right, it's all unwritten and unstated, but I want a deal to get a monopoly on satellite broadcasting or on newspapers, and in return I'll support you electorally. By the way, if you don't give me that deal, I'm going to be over here. Of course, if you've got a multi-party setup under proportional representation, much harder to do those deals.
I've got some figures here. We've covered here KPMG, PwC, where you used to work. Hundreds of thousands of pounds going to the Labour Party, hundreds of thousands of pounds going to the Liberal Democrats and to David Cameron. Why do the mainstream media, even the state-mandated media, not cover it?
Well, certainly if you're owned by Murdoch, then you won't be covering it because you've already got huge benefit out of this system and all his various mini and macro monopolies. Of course, if you're mainstream media, you're part of this system. It's very important to remember you're dependent on leaks from civil servants, you're dependent on your relationships with a lot of the MPs and a lot of the ministers. And you may not just see it because you're in a system. If you're in a system, you don't see it.
David Cameron famously said in 2010, he's going to put an end to all of this.
Yes.
Well, it was very impressive, even for a politician to say this publicly. What happened to his pledge about lobbying?
Well, there's several things there. One is that, it's a politician's promise. Any of us who now vote on the basis of what a politician promises, I guess we need our heads examining. We want to vote on the basis of what they're actually going to do, which by and large in the current system is very little. The second point is that if you're going to fix lobbying once and for all, so you take that power away from the lobbies and you give it back to the people and the people's interests, if you're going to do that, you've got to change the system of government, which is what my book's about, and you've got to change it wall to wall. The odd bit of fiddling with the register of lobbyists, which is a sort of a sop to say...
There was a regulator, the UK Public Affairs Committee.
Yeah.
No use?
No. You need, first of all, you need checks on the way in which policies are designed. You know, you can have any policy you want. Well, I'm terribly sorry, that's not. They've got to be vetted. You need feedback on what happened as a result of that policy, and you need people who know what they're talking about.
I just want to finally ask you what the voter should do then.
Ask the politicians at the hustings how. You know, you say the world's going to be a better place, the NHS is going to be wonderful, schools are going to be sorted. How? And keep on them at that. Frankly, actually voting for anything other than the mainstream parties is probably the only way we can now get this system fixed. And in the long run, we need to vote for a new system, not for political parties.
Ed Straw, thanks again.
Cheers.
Despite the Prime Minister's denial that the transatlantic trade and investment partnership deal threatens to privatize the NHS, doubts remain. Ed Miliband has already said he will block a NHS sell-off triggered by TTIP. But while secret negotiations have been going on, only WikiLeaks seems to have obtained documents pertaining to TTIP as well as a similar Trans-Pacific partnership deal. With me is WikiLeaks' Kristinn Hrafnsson. Kristinn, welcome back to Going Underground, to the serious issues of WikiLeaks. TTIP, it's finally becoming a big issue here in Britain after Ed Miliband said that the National Health Service would be opting out of any privatization of healthcare that TTIP would mean. What has WikiLeaks discovered about these secret negotiations?
Well, I mean, we have published chapters of both the negotiations of trade and service agreement with 50 nations across the Atlantic and the EU and the USA, and of course the Pacific side of the same sort of structure, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. What we see in these agreements are the same sort of principle which spring up, the neoconservative ideal of deregulation, of privatization, and the creation of a supernatural body that can actually enforce nations to comply to these ideals. So a large company could actually sue Great Britain or any other nation to comply with taking back measures which are trying to be set forward to protect, for example, the NHS.
But the Prime Minister here has been very clear to say this is overblown, these are exaggerations. I know that WikiLeaks very keen to stress the role of trade advisors, as they're known, although WikiLeaks says trade advisors can mean something very different.
Well, I mean, these are called free trade agreements, but they are anything but about free trade. This is about the interests of large corporations. They totally rule these agreements according to the draft documents that we've had and that we have leaked and published. And these are, and for example, tribunals that I mentioned, the supernatural one, are going to be packed with corporate lawyers who will dictate how these trade agreements will be enforced.
Do you think WikiLeaks can take credit for raising the profile of TTIP? Because it certainly wasn't in the mainstream media, obviously anonymous as well. New documents presumably could raise the profile of these secret negotiations, after all.
Well, I hope we had a part in that. We saw it when we started publishing parts of these international secret negotiations well outside the World Trade Organization for the sole purpose of keeping it secret, that it was a very slow pickup. But, you know, the organizations that have been focusing on the rights issues that are being attacked there, the people who are concerned about the freedom of the internet, copyright laws pertaining to the pharmaceutical industry, protested by Reporters Without Borders, etc., etc. So it has been very much an underreported story, but it's slowly getting there. People are realizing how extremely serious issues are being negotiated there behind closed doors.
Of course, equally seriously, arguably, is the fact that if trade advisors are in fact working for these big corporations, there may be lots of them, but are they breaking the law if they try and leak to whistleblower organizations or publishers like WikiLeaks?
Well, they are doing the right thing. That's the most important.
Is there a public interest defense? There are thousands of these people working out right now, arguably, whether the NHS would have to be privatized. But if someone watching right now is thinking about leaking a document, what would they face?
Well, I mean, that probably has some implications according to local laws in each country. I don't know that, but they should. This is something that should be out and debated in the open. I mean, the Pacific deal that I mentioned, covering a third of all world trade, we leaked it a year ago. If we hadn't done that, it would probably have been fast-tracked through the US Congress before the end of last year. That was the idea by the Obama administration. The very fact that it was leaked and it got out in the open and it was contested and protested sort of slow down the process, and it hasn't gone into effect yet. We need to debate this. This is a much bigger. There is so much bigger. There's so much interest at stake here. That
well, it is deliberately secret, though. Yeah. So if a British citizen is involved in some of these negotiations, which are going on right now, maybe in an office block near here. Yeah. I mean, what about the fear factor for a British citizen who's watching how a corporation could tear up British civic life, maybe?
The fear factor should be there, and it should be contributing to people to actually stand up and get this information.
I meant fearful of the authorities against them. I mean,
we know that there are reprisals, and it is not without danger to do the right thing and show courage and leak information.
With your Pacific Partnership leaks, as you say, it did affect things on the Hill in Washington. Over here, we're hearing British politicians talk about TTIP for the first time in the House of Commons. How sure should we be that they're not just saying, right, we're aware of it now, we're reading WikiLeaks, we're going to do something about it, but actually the negotiations...
I wouldn't trust that. We have to have the documents on the table. We have to have everything on the surface. And trusting politicians, of course, you shouldn't do that. Especially when they are keeping things secret from you.
Are you surprised that more leaks haven't been coming from these secret negotiations?
Let's see what happens. We might see some more of information coming out of this.
And of course, shortly before the decision by the Swedish court, WikiLeaks had already said that there was an imminent release of papers. You're presumably not going to tell me, but were they to do with TTIP?
I cannot say what it's going to be on. We generally don't do that before we publish information, but we are receiving information and we will continue to publish.
Do you think the threat of publication may have affected the Swedish court decision?
I wouldn't want to speculate on that, but I mean the case in Sweden has been highly politicized.
Kristinn Hrafnsson, thank you. That's it for today, but join us again on Wednesday when we ask why 10,000 people die in Britain every winter because they can't afford their heating bills. In the meantime, drop us a line on Twitter at @underground_RT, like our page on Facebook, listen to our extended interviews on SoundCloud, and email us on goingunderground@rttv.co.uk. And don't forget RT UK News with Bill Dodd every weekday evening at 6, 8, 9 and 10. See you on Wednesday.